Hello, team, and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra, giving you the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where shall I start today? Well, let's go back a couple of days to Joe Biden visiting Kyiv and Zelensky, and an article written in the Atlantic by Elliot Cohen, a really good article. And I know about half of the viewers here will be, if you're in America. I know there are viewers from all around the world here, but for you American viewers, there'll be about half of you probably who are dyed-in-the-wool Republicans or certainly pro-Republican, and I understand that. And there will be a lot of you who will no doubt be excoriating Biden at every opportunity that presents itself. The kind of he represents the Democrats and the leader of that party, and I'm not that party. He doesn't represent me, and I'm against everything he kind of stands for, type thing. I know, I'm simplifying here, but for the purpose of this article, I think what it's interesting to do, if you're an American, is to take yourself out of American politics and see Joe Biden as the rest of the world might see Joe Biden. So actually, the rest of the world has been calling out, or at least it may be the sorts of circles and I mix with, or things that I read. But there's a large proportion of the rest of the world that has actually seen American power, soft power, sort of decline in the Trump years, and has been looking for a kind of a leader that will kind of unify and not drive a sort of isolationist America and go back and say, right, we need America first, we need to look after ourselves, but is actually going out and saying, yep, right, I'm going to lead the rest of the world and unify the rest of the world. And this has provided a really good opportunity for Biden to do that. And this article kind of takes that on board and looks at the visit within that kind of context. So this is the article is Biden just destroyed Putin's last hope. And you may think Biden is too old and this and that, and yeah, he may be all of those things, but actually what he did in going to Kyiv was, I think, a very sound bit of statesmanship. So the president's visit to Ukraine was a gut punch to the Russian leader, so says Elliot Cohen. And after the initial intro, it says other heads of governments preceded him, earning deserved credit. But it is an altogether different thing when the president of the United States, who is indeed the leader of the free world, shows up. His words mattered. He pledged our unwavering and unflagging commitment to Ukraine's democracy, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And even more important, that the United States will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. Symbols matter. A Kennedy or a Reagan at the Berlin Wall, a Churchill with a cigar and a bowler. For that matter, a green clad Zelensky growling, I need ammunition, not a ride. Simply by taking the hazardous trip to Kyiv, Biden made a strategic move of cardinal importance. While the president clearly intended to bolster the confidence of Ukraine and the commitment of ambivalent Europeans and neo isolationist Americans, his real audiences lay elsewhere, as his remarks about Western strength indicated. So, this is to say, this is my sidebar, this is to say, whatever Americans might believe about Biden, whether he should have gone there, whether he should have been seeing to things in Ohio and the train wreck there, or domestic politics, or going to the southern border, as some Republican lawmakers have said, this wasn't about anything to do with America. This was his audience was Russia. His audience, he had an audience of one in doing that, and that was Putin. So Russia, continues the article, Russia has cycled through a series of theories of victory in Ukraine, that Kyiv's leaders would flee, that Ukraine's population would not fight, that its army would be crumpled up by a sudden blitz or by grinding assaults. It has been reduced to one last hope, that Vladimir Putin's will is stronger than Joe Biden's. And Biden just said, by deed as well as word, oh no, it's not. That is a gut punch to Russia's leader. The visual contrast between an American president with his signature aviator sunglasses walking in sunny downtown Kyiv and a pugnacious and eloquent president of Ukraine And a Russian president who is yet to visit the war zone is also striking, not to mention the difference between an American president who mingles with others, shaking hands, hugging, and slapping backs, and a Russian president who keeps his subordinates at a physical distance and who has to be surrounded by flunkies and actors when he supposedly meets with normal people. This is super, super important. The optics here are really clear. You've got Joe Biden, meeting and talking and laughing with Zelensky and Zelensky's wife, the first lady of Ukraine, and as it says here, clapping back, shaking hands. And Putin is diametrically opposed to that in terms of how he does his kind of human interactions. Um, no belligerent words from the Kremlin will change those visual images, which will be seen in Russia as well as around the world. This is not a stunt, but rather an act of statesmanship. Biden's visit comes at a moment when much hangs in the balance. The Chinese have begun making noises about arming Russia, according to the United States government, which would be a very great change in this war. The Western allies, including the democracies of Asia, have begun mobilizing their military industries. The Russian offensives that were supposed to produce large gains timed to the anniversary of the invasion have instead carpeted the Donbass with the bodies of thousands of men. And meanwhile, Ukraine is building up a force of its own, a force to use in its own counteroffensive. And it sort of finishes to that end, nothing matters more than American leadership. The recovery of the prestige and weight that have been wasted or diffused over the past decades. We are not near the conclusion of this war, and there's much of a tangible nature that needs to be done to bring the conflict closer to its end. Words and gestures are critical, but only when accompanied by deeds. But for now, by taking a bold step, President Biden has made the future for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the cause of freedom under the law a great deal brighter. And I think that's really important. It's really important to see what all of the things that Biden was achieving by doing this. So, like, you could look at this and say, well, he just had a little trip to Kyiv, shook his hands. He should have been back in America doing this. I mean, what's the point in that? Blah blah blah. And a $500 million package came out of that with some ammunition. Well, kind of so what? No, 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 no. This is about communicating strength and unity and humanity to Ukraine, to the people of Ukraine. You've had people of Ukraine going absolutely bonkers for this. They absolutely loved the fact that Biden came to Ukraine, and it's quite risky. So normally he'd go in Air Force One and then go in, his limo that's bulletproofed and whatnot. He had to get on a train from Poland to Kyiv. It was a fairly quick sort of meeting with Zelensky and walk around certain parts and visiting here and there, but it's hugely symbolically important, and it shows the vast chasm of difference between Putin and his very much an isolationist position, both in terms of a lack of allies, a lack of support from the world, Iran and China to a degree, isn't a great sort of group of friends to have. And that so the Putin with that isolationist approach in terms of the geopolitics, but also physically and individually. So he sits at the end of a very long table from people who's really worried about germs, the whole COVID thing. He didn't basically come out of his palace and all that kind of stuff, which also leads into the theories of him actually being really ill. So the germ thing was because he's under treatment potentially for cancer, possibly Parkinson's. All these kind of theories floating around, but he's certainly not a well man. There were apparently tunnels to go into his palace for a couple of years where you had to be sprayed as you went in, and that's why we didn't see him out in public for the whole time in COVID. And just so another what I'm trying to say is here he is, this isolated leader, and here Zelensky is his arch nemesis, Zelensky, with his other arch nemesis, Biden, shaking hands and walking around Kiev in the sunlight, talking and laughing and being friendly and just showing that, presenting an image to both Putin and Russia of the strength and the posturing of Zelensky and his allies. And then we had also this statement by Kuleba, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine, to the United Nations, which again was in stark contrast to Putin. So Putin's speech that was an hour and 45 minutes of rambling boredom to assembled people in Moscow the other day. Most of it was on domestic politics. It was pretty uninspiring. And even when he was trying to be inspiring, it was very divisive and very um, anti-West, anti everyone else. And again, this kind of isolationist posturing. What we have from this speech, the speech is interesting for a bunch of reasons. The transcription here is particularly interesting because it very poignantly, every time Russia is mentioned, it is not capitalized. I mean, there's proper capitalization of everything in this speech. Okay. So yesterday, President Zelensky capitalized, made it clear in his address that Russian responsibility, Russian not capitalized. Literally everywhere in that speech, every time Russia is mentioned, it is in lowercase. That is just this lovely little dig. I mean, you can say that's not achieving anything, and that's maybe counterproductive and childish, but there's something, I don't know, there's something that I find quietly amusing, or at least poignant about that. It's so you capitalize things, I guess, in almost in its as a term of respect, or a way of denoting respect, proper nouns, and so on. Whereas this is a common noun, a concrete noun, denoting that we don't respect Russia at the moment. And so what happens in the beginning of this article is there is a lot of talk against Russia, so listing the sort of things they've done and how terrible it is, for the Ukrainians. But then it sort of moves as it comes towards the end into a positive outlook involving the rest of the world. And this is what you don't get from people like Putin, which is this warmth towards the rest of the world. You never hear Putin say something and think, "Oh, what a good guy, what a good bloke, what a nice man," so bringing together this part of the world, or every time you look at him, you're thinking KGB, former KGB, nasty human being that that is accountable for so many international crimes and war crimes, the assassination of all sorts of people, giving the rubber stamp for opposition leaders to be killed or poisoned, to give permission for UK based, Russians to be assassinated and all this kind of stuff. And you watch him talk, and I just don't, there's no warmth I would ever feel towards Putin. He's not that kind of human. It's not in him. Um, because he's a dictator, right? That's simply what he is. Whereas this kind of talk, often, and you hear this with Zelensky, Zelensky's speeches are at times absolutely astounding in their brilliance, and knowing his audience and picking his words and being emotive and being positive and getting people to come alongside with him. It's not driving a wedge between us and them, and it's otherizing them. It's about taking everyone with him, and you are all with me, apart from Russia in the case of Ukraine. So here, Kuleba says, while hitting peaceful Ukrainian cities with missiles, Russia uses food and energy as weapons against the rest of the world. Putin sends tanks into Ukraine to kill Ukrainians while stealing the well-being and stability from every European household with energy blackmail, and playing Hunger Games with Asian, African, and Middle Eastern families by threatening the functioning of the grain corridor. Very interesting use of getting everyone around the world on board with Ukraine. Hey, Russia here, he screwed you guys over. Like Asia, Africa, Middle East, you are paying more for grain because of Putin. This wouldn't have happened if Putin hadn't invaded. No problems with food around the world, right? The grain corridor was sorted. We are doing well, thank you very much. Now the price has gone up, and the supply's gone down, and that is Putin. So you guys with us? All right, we're on your side here. So he continues, we're in the same boat. There you go. We are in the same boat. All of us, Europeans, Asians, Africans, Arab nations, Latin American states, we are in the same boat. And this is appealing to those countries that have been sitting on the fence a lot about Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine will know where they're getting their weapons and money from predominantly. And it ain't South America. And it ain't Asian countries and it ain't African countries. So there's a job for Ukraine to bring those nations on board in this coalition of unity and support for Ukraine. Um, we are in the same boat, and we must confront these threats together. There is no place for neutrality. Again, don't sit on the fence. I said back in February here at the United Nations that no nation will be able to sit out this crisis created by Russia. It still stands. The best reaction to this crisis is to stand with Ukraine to protect the UN Charter. It's talking to the UN. If you're here at the UN and you support the UN Charter, which is like, the kind of rule book for you guys, then protecting Ukraine is the only realistic outcome, you know, if you're going to take that UN Charter seriously. Russia likes to talk about the developed world and the developing world. It tries to drive a wedge between ones and the others. We in Ukraine don't differentiate. All people deserve a normal life, safety, stability, and confidence. So he's appealing to those things that people will be hearing those words and thinking, "Yep, yep." It's not. This is about positive thing like normal life, safety, stability, confidence. What was Putin talking about? Sexual decadence, coming in and stealing our children and ruining the children, all that like negativity, like everyone going back and into that isolated us and them. The difference here is palpable, I think. Um, but we must stay united to, again, positive words, united to stop Russia's blackmail and the war on humanity it launched. We are humanity. It's a war on us coming from them. So it is the us and theming of Russia, they are the them, but the us is everyone in the world. He's trying to bring the entire world to Ukraine's cause. Where I don't see Putin doing that. And we'll talk about this in a second, they've got no friends. Like China, yeah, come on, China, yeah, come on, Iran, let's shake hands. Right? Why does no one like us? Oh, it's because we've been distinctly morally abhorrent. Kuleba continues, dear colleagues, the most important pillar of international peace and security, again, trigger words of positivity. International peace and security is a territorial integrity of states. No country is allowed to change internationally recognized borders by force. Russia has badly damaged this principle. So if you take this principle serious, UN, this is a guiding principle, internationally recognized borders, right? You should be on our side, he's saying. Sorry, I interrupted myself. Damage this principle, and now the threat of war is hanging over everyone's head. It's not just about Ukraine, this is about everyone here. To restore international peace and security, we need urgent and decisive actions. Yesterday, President Zelensky proposed a peace formula, which includes not only accountability, but a mechanism of security guarantees based on Article 51 of the UN Charter. It's about saying, right, this is the UN. This is all about the UN. You guys, I'm speaking to you guys. You're all together here. It's about using the UN Charter. Zelensky's drafted something that is based on the Article 51 of the UN Charter. Ukraine has developed the Kyiv Security Compact, proposing a modern, multi-layered mechanism of guarantees to ensure Ukraine's security until the moment we become part of NATO. The document is, until the moment we become part of NATO. It's like, it will happen. It's a given. I love that kind of assertive confidence. This document is much broader than a tool to guarantee the security of Ukraine. We see it as a universal mechanism, these positive, everyone's in the in-group type thing, apart from Russia. Universal mechanism that can be applied to other countries and contexts in order to strengthen regional and global security architecture. Ukraine keeps working with partners to realize a vision of the Kyiv Security Compact. This is our added value to international peace and security for all UN member states. In other words, what he's saying is we're doing the hard work so that actually this will benefit all of you. Some of you states who are sitting there not really bothered about this or not really put your neck on a line as to who you support. We're doing things. We're putting architecture in place that will benefit you guys if you're ever in similar situations to this. So I think this is really sort of positive speech making. Although there's a lot of negativity about Russia, but it's about communicating to the audience why Russia are the bad guys here, and then saying the rest of us, we are all the good guys. And if you don't see yourself as a good guy, you need to. You need to come in with this family or this coalition of support for Ukraine because it's the right thing to do. And it's why we know it's the right thing to do because I've just explained how wrong Russia have been. So I don't know. I think that was some good speech making there. And in fact, what I'm going to go on to next is this because it kind of plays into that. So this is Russian propagandists again, same sort of TV shows, complain that they need more allies and no one is really coming to their side. Skabieva consoles them that as soon as Russia has real successes, allies will appear. I've got bad news for her, says Anton Garashenko. So let's have a little watch of this. I will read it out to you because I know a lot of you are listening rather than watching. So we've got this guy with a beard who I think is a lawmaker in Russia, member of the parliament there, member of the Duma. But it's mainly him and this woman here. So he says, everybody united against us. Here's a Munich conspiracy, just as it was when they divided Poland. And now they're going to divide the Russian Federation. Yeah, well, good luck to you guys. We should definitely understand that we have allies. We have to line them up. We have to prepare an anti-American line, a defensive line. We have BRICS, but it's not very bright so far. So, just me to interrupt there. So, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Yeah, we've got friends, but it's not very bright. They're not. They're not great. They're not like really good friends. Anyway, he continues. We have BRICS, but they're not very bright. We need to make it tough and understandable that this structure will stand up to them if it's willing to stand up to them. But BRICS, pardon me, says someone else, are allies of the US, India, for example. So this is the idea that, yeah, we've got BRICS. Yeah, but, you know, Brazil has been fairly friendly with America. You've got South Africa is not like an enemy or anything. It seems to be siding with BRICS more at the moment. And then you've got India that isn't particularly friendly with China. So, you know, as the other guy says, yeah, it's not a great bunch of mates. And he says, well, if that's the case, then we have to do something else to make them ready to step in. I don't know what that would be. Sounds pretty coercive. You know, we can do it alone, of course. Of course, you can do it alone. But if we have obvious allies in the form of China and Iran, then why should we refuse them? I mean, this is really great confidence here. We can do this alone. We can win this war alone. But no, you can't. There's absolutely no way, unless you're going to just send up a flurry of nuclear missiles, that you are going to win this war. Russia cannot win this war. Not with what it has pitted against it. Not when you look at the combined GDPs of the countries that are coming to support Ukraine. Economies win wars. Deepest pockets win wars. It doesn't matter the forces you've got on the ground at the time. And the forces that Russia do have on the ground and the materiel is not enough. It is a very... It was just a paper army. It was never a Potemkin army. It was never what it was supposed to be. It's supposed to be the second greatest army in the world, and it's not even the second greatest army in Ukraine. So but of course the confidence of this guy. But if we have obvious allies in the form of China and Iran, then why should we refuse them? The other guy's looking unimpressed. You have to understand that many are in a wait and see. So this is what's her name? Sarajevo. This is the female propagandist that we often see. You have to understand that many are in a wait and see position right now. So this is the idea. And going back to the UN, there will be a bunch of those nations at the UN sitting and waiting to see who's going to win, and then eventually going, yeah, we supported them. You know, a lot of people sitting on the fence. She continues, as soon as we begin to really succeed, then our allies will appear. Yeah. Are they really your allies then? It's just, you know, that's a bit of opportunism, really. So he says, right, so tomorrow's message for me is going to be the key one. That I presume is Putin's message. And I think things should change. We've been doing a good job. If we're fighting at half strength, we're doing well. I mean, again, this is just complete propaganda. We've been doing a good job. No, you haven't. Not on any metric has Russia been doing a good job in this war. There's no metric that you can provide apart from... no, there's no metric you can provide to show that Russia is doing a good job here. And then he claims that we're only fighting at half strength. So in other words, you've got what, half the rest of your material? Where is that? Where are half the rest of your tanks? Where are your T-90s? Where are your T-14 Armatas that you spent trillions of rubles supposedly sort of designing and producing? You've got 14 prototypes, is it, or whatever? So you are not fighting at half strength. You're fighting at full strength. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to mobilize. And looking like you're going to need to mobilize another 500,000 people. Fighting at half strength, maybe because you haven't mobilized the rest of your population. Well, if that's how you're going to define fighting at half strength, then maybe, but that's ridiculous. And you are not doing well. Well, if we're talking about really starting to put up a fight, look, there's still a drop in GDP. Over 2%, it's obvious. And then building up the military industrial complex and consolidating all the allies we have into one powerful fist, it'll give us the opportunity to get a whole other level, which we desperately need. So he's saying, again, outright contradiction. He's saying, we're doing really well. We're only fighting at half strength. And then he goes on to say, we desperately need our allies to help us. He literally ends with, which we desperately need. Well, then you're not doing well, then. If you desperately need that help from Iran and China, then you are not doing really well and you're not fighting at half strength. So just a bunch of word salad nonsense of some guy that's trying to retain the belief, cognitive dissonance reduction, or at least he knows that he's just lying to the audience, where he's like, Russia are the greatest. What's all this evidence that we're not the greatest? Oh, dang, how do I deal with that? And just kind of sweep it aside and just have this inflated sense of where Russia is in the world, and an inflated sense, I'm going to lie to myself at how well we're doing. Look, we're doing really well. But also there's an element of that truth getting through because I think we are desperate for allies. And they're complaining they've got no allies, and the allies will turn up when they start doing well. But how do we do well without those allies? Oh, you're in a bit of a bit of a bind there, bit of a circular bind. Anyway, that's that. We'll move on to talk about the chief of the GUR, the Ukrainian Secret Services, Kirill Budanov. He's a fairly popular Budanov, I think. He talks about Russian mobilization, Russians' weapon production capabilities, his opinion on Bakhmut, and not accidental arsons in Russia, and the near future of the war. Interesting interview, and there's a little bit of it translated here, but not a great deal. He just excerpts a tiny bit. So I'm actually going to go to the original article. Really good translation by War Translated. So what does he have to say? So Budanov, the big Russian offensive they are aiming for is already underway, but it's going on so well that not everyone even sees it. This is the quality of this offensive. So it's pretty derisory remarks, really. They have a strategic objective to reach the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions by March 31st. The interview then asked, Western media actively wrote that mass mobilization would begin in Russia in late January or early February. They predicted numbers of up to 500,000 people. Now it doesn't look like it has started. Budanov says, who told you it hasn't? It's hidden. Is it possible to recruit that many people in secret? In a country with a population of over 100 million, what's the problem with recruiting 500,000? So Budanov making claims that they are continuing that mobilization process. They're just not officially talking about it. He later says, as a patriot and a military man, so this is about Bakhmut. They do have a little bit of talk about Bakhmut, and I'll join it halfway through. As a patriot and a military man, surrendering even a millimeter of the territory is a disaster. This is my personal logic. You can agree with it or not. From a military point of view, holding Bakhmut allows us to deter the Russians in that area and inflict catastrophic losses on them. Are we exhausting them in this way? We are exhausting them and defending our territory, which cannot be assessed in the context of whether it is advisable or inexpedient to leave. We are talking about redistributing forces, not just surrendering the city. Perhaps it would be more efficient to use people in other areas. I do not agree with this logic. So Budanov thinking that definitely the calculation is still in the favor of remaining defending Bakhmut. The interviewer says, you mentioned earlier that Russia is significantly depleting its stockpile of equipment and shells, including 152 caliber ones, that they have about 30% of the total number of shells left. How can they go on the offensive with that amount of shells and such equipment? Budanov, they can't. That's why not everyone even notices this huge offensive. As for the weapon stock, so this is a really good point. So had this offensive, this is me talking obviously, had the offensive been this offensive a year ago, you can bet that there would be a massive artillery barrage on a daily basis happening right up and down everywhere where there's offensives. There is artillery being used, but only in really select places and not nearly to the extent that we've seen it earlier in the war. And again, what does that suggest? If this is actually the offensive, what does that suggest? Inference to the best explanation. This is an abductive argument. So, for the pro Russians who deny, the pro Kremlin bots who deny that the Russians are running out of ammunition, why are they firing less? Why is there less artillery being used on these front lines on a daily basis? Um, so what Budanov says is, as for the weapons stockpile, they are setting up mass production of artillery. So he basically said, so I repeat that they can't. That's why not everyone even notices this quote huge offensive, because there just isn't the artillery along with it. As for the weapons stockpile, they are now setting up mass production of artillery shells. This once again confirms that there are no stockpiles of shells. There are not enough. For 2 months now, the Russian groups operating in our country have been living in a mode of maximum ammunition saving. More or less normally, ammunition is now being used exclusively in Bakhmut and the Liman sector. They tried to storm Vuhledar several times and will continue to try, so we could add this location. In all other areas, ammunition is being saved. Goes on to say later, the interviewer asks, do they have a chance to find these shells in North Korea? Theoretically, there is a possibility. Do they bring shells from there? There are no confirmed cases in North Korea. A test batch was brought in from Iran, and now they are trying to bring in another batch, not a test batch, which is about 20,000 shells. This is nothing compared to the numbers that are being used. So 20,000 shells is a low amount of shells being fired by Russia on a daily basis. So then get 20,000 shells from Iran. That's a third. Depends on who you believe, but the worst case scenario is that's a third of what they were firing at the peak in one day. So they get 20,000 shells from Iran. That isn't really that big a deal, is what's being said. This is nothing compared to the numbers that are being used. The interviewer says, our partners and we also have a shortage of these shells. Of course we do. It's impossible to compare the defense industry of the Soviet Union, ours, and most Western countries with the capacities that existed during the Cold War. What does this mean? Will the war shift from artillery to other tactics? Everyone sees a transition to a different tactic in Bakhmut. Vuhledar was a vivid example of this. In Bakhmut, it's just infantry coming in wave after wave. Their artillery is only supporting them, and there are very few armored vehicles. In Vuhledar, armored vehicles were used, but they were destroyed in the first hours, and everything turned into small arms fighting. I've said before that Bakhmut's a really good example of evidence to suggest that Russia don't have the artillery, ammunition, and perhaps pieces that they had previously, because they would have flattened Bakhmut. I'm sure of it. Like you see in other places that they took earlier in the war, they flatten these places and then move in. Why haven't they done that to Bakhmut? Earlier, you said Russia had enough missiles for 3 or 4 attacks, and then it would have to fire them from the assembly line. Has this moment come? Budanov says there are small percentages of the total number left. Less is produced than they use in one salvo, and production is not keeping up. Russia is not the Soviet Union. You mentioned their conditional maximum of producing 50 missiles a month. Less. In total, they sometimes produce 20 or 22 caliber missiles per month. These are the ones that are launched from the sea. About 15, sometimes up to 20, are X-101 missiles. That is why the number of missiles in each salvo is decreasing. The intensity of the shelling is decreasing. Initially, massive rocket attacks were on Mondays, then once every 8 days, and now once every 10 days or 2 weeks. They're reducing the number of missiles and increasing the time interval. Exactly what I've been saying. This is like the evidence is there that they're running out of missiles and they're running out of ammunition. And pro-Russian voices can say what they like, but why, if they aren't running out of those, are they firing fewer missiles and taking longer to fire them? What explains that? And why, if this is the Russian offensives, are they firing fewer shells than they were? What explains that? The interviewer then says, what prevents the Russians from increasing missile production? Budanov says, there is no capacity. It's a bubble. You have not done anything. If you've not done anything for 30 years, you cannot do what you want in one day during the war and sanctions. And then just the last little bit, talking about fires in Russia, which I thought was an interesting little aside here. So the interviewer says, at the end of last year, the OSINT agency MOLFAR calculated that in November, December 2022 alone, the statistics of fires and major incidents in Russia doubled. How much of this are coincidence and how much is a coincident consequence of the war? Budanov says much of this is not a coincidence. Something is always burning, so I try and report to you Russia on fire just to show you that this is a problem inside Russia. Signaling equipment on the railroads roads burns several times a day, on different highways constantly for 2 or 3 hours, sometimes for 5 or 6 hours, and traffic is suspended along the entire section. It is clear that it is burning for a reason. Are Ukrainians helping in Russia? Why only Ukrainians? And this is like super important little nugget here. I would say this: money makes wonders. That's a very cryptic thing, but that's basically to say, as I understand it, hey, when you pay people to do partisan activity in Russia, turns out they're happy enough to do it. Yeah, interesting, interesting. So that's Budanov, and I thought that was a really fascinating bunch of stuff that he said there. I'm going to talk very quickly about the logistics here of this, in this case, the Oshkosh truck pulling this T-90. So everyone was talking about how wonderful it was that Ukrainians had captured it looks like they captured a working T-90M, one of the latest Russian tanks. A lot of people will be focusing on a Russian tank in this video. I'm a lot more interested in the truck, says Trent Telenko. The Oshkosh M1070 HET ACA tank transporter is a key link in the mechanized recovery logistics supply chain. This is a logistics thread. The M1070 heavy equipment transporter is designed to carry a combat-loaded M1A2 Abrams and its crew. The truck cab is large enough for a driver, co-driver, and 4-man tank crew. The truck-trailer combination has 25-ton pull winch to drag a damaged Abrams on board. And in wartime, this capability is used to transport heavily damaged Abrams to depot level repair facilities for damage beyond local unit repair capability. A lesser used but often thought about capability is massing M1070 for long distance operational level repositioning of tank companies and battalions where rail lines don't reach. So generally, if you're going to take a tank from one position up the front line to another position far away, you don't really want to drive that tank all the way. It's not an efficient use of fuel, and actually it can wear out, damage the tracks and whatnot. So quite often you'll put the tanks on transporters and transport them to elsewhere rather, yeah, as a preference. Um, the extra seats in the cab mean both the tank crew and the tanks are resting during the movement. MilitaryToday.com reports that N1070 HETs have been provided to Ukrainian shipments in 2022 and 23. Both the N1070 HET tractor and its associated M1000 trailer are C5 and C17 air transportable. So that means that you can fit these beasts into the big military cargo planes. In the UK, that'd be like a Hercules. So C5, although I don't think we're using them anymore, but or at least we're using them, but we're not making them. I think, are we moving over to this to the American ones? I don't know. C5 and C17 air transportable. To give you an idea of its relative importance in the US Army logistics, there are 1,400 new and retrofitted M1070A1 on order for a US Army to support 8,000 Abrams and 6,000 M2 or 3 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. So they'd have about, so if you've got like 14,000 armored fighting vehicles, tanks and ARVs, you'd have about 1,400 of these trucks. So that's about a 10-to-1 ratio. So 10 tanks, if you like, to one of these. That is what. Oh, here you go. One M1070 is provided for every 14 Abrams and Bradleys. No, it's not. He's done his maths wrong. It's literally 1 to 10. Sorry, Trent. The M1070 fleet is roughly the same size as the M88 Hercules heavy equipment recovery combat utility lift and evacuation system fleet. The tail for every 14 American heavy and I'd say 10 American heavy tracked armored combat vehicles includes one M1070 and one M88 to recover, retrograde, and repair them. Both N1070 and M88s have been provided for Armed Forces Ukraine because they recognize the mechanized recovery and logistics supply chain is inadequate, as the abandoned Ukrainian tank and AFV numbers on the Oryx website has made clear. these donations and Ukraine's systematic conversion of captured T-62s into Brem 62 recovery vehicles represents a maturing of Ukrainian mechanized recovery logistics in the Russia-Ukrainian war, a lesson learned. In other words, some of the T-62s that they've captured, they've actually turned into recovery vehicles, ARVs, armored recovery vehicles. Russia appeared to, again, it's about taking advantage of every asymmetry, of every competitive advantage you have, eking out those advantages that Ukrainians might have. And in this case, it's with the logistics concerning the recovery of abandoned or damaged vehicles. The Russians just can't do it. So what do the Ukrainians do? They go over with drones and drop munitions in open hatches. Now the Russians, a lot of people have thought, oh my goodness, Ukrainians are blowing up loads of tanks really easily. Those drones are amazing. Actually, no. Those tanks are almost or very often abandoned, and because they can't be recovered, because the Russians don't have the capability to do that. So the Ukrainians then hover over, and just in case the Russians do develop that capability, they want to just take that out. So they blow out the insides with IEDs dropped from drones in the open hatches. And this is another indication that Russia are really struggling in this war. You know, they can't, if they lose a tank out in the open, that's it, lost. They can't recover it. When is the last time you saw, and it may be, you know, selective videos showing and whatnot, but I have not seen the Russians transport damaged and abandoned tanks at all. Where I have seen quite a lot of vehicles that can do that for the Ukrainians and do so. So uh, there is a change. The Ukrainians are learning, and they're getting not only given, but they're also adapting some of their tanks into ARVs to give them again that competitive advantage. Russia's ammunition shortage in eastern Ukraine is reportedly so severe that its troops there have reportedly been issued with completely unusable munitions, including shells which are so rusty they've simply disintegrated. So you've got a number of different photographs here of just, I mean, you fire that, that's gonna explode in your barrel, or it certainly isn't gonna hit where you want it to, or it just won't go off. Just yeah. So that is just incredible. And yeah, the idea that the Russians don't have enough ammunition isn't possibly because they've used it all and they don't have the stocks. It's that the stocks they do have is in such poor condition, and there have been lots of reports of them firing a load of ammunition that is just unusable, basically. After complaints from Yevgeny Prigozhin about Wagner fighters being denied ammunition, Alexander Khodagovsky of the pro-Russian Vostok Battalion has written that the situation is the same for everyone, indicating an extreme case of shell famine. So not just Wagner suffering here, not just Prigozhin, but the Vostok Battalion as well. The VCHK OGPU Telegram channel, which is a pro-Russian Telegram channel, has posted photos of some of the ammunition that it says Russian regular forces have been issued. This suggests that the shortage isn't just confined to independent mercenary or militia groups, but also affects the army itself. The supplies include, quote, cases of inadequate quality ammunition, including category 2 and 3, which defects or generally with defects or generally unsuitable for combat use. As can be seen from the pictures, the ammunition now is unusable, and probably unsafe, likely resulting from poor storage conditions. And indeed, the Ukrainians were there. I posted this the other day, talked about this the other day. They were talking about getting ammunition from Bulgaria and saying this ammunition has been absolutely perfectly stored, and this is just perfect ammunition that the Ukrainians are getting given. So they don't have the storage issues, at least not from the stocks they're getting from outside of Ukraine. I don't know about the Ukrainians' own stocks; they've probably gone through those and don't have any left. Anyway, I've still got half my tabs to go, so I'm gonna have to finish it now. But thank you so much for watching that. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for all your continuing support. I'm going to get off and go and speak to YouTube now. So toodle pips, and I'll speak to you later.